All right, now on to part 6, where we start to get into records that were, I think, most substantial to me. The ones that really stuck around, the ones that really made the biggest splash, the ones that felt very profound in not only maybe doing something new that I hadn't heard before, doing something surprising for their discography, or just doing something with a lot of great riffs. And we start with something that is just doing a very standard style of traditional death metal with a lot of great riffs. Fear the Apparition is getting a more broad release in 2024. I'll talk about it more in February, but this is a Spanish traditional death metal band with a thrashing death metal style who are fantastic at it. There are members of Ataraxy in the band, and of course we expect nothing but the best from them. So this is just one great traditional death metal song after another in a very high, to a very high standard. So we'll include it here now, but I'll talk more about this record in a couple of months. Now, I probably could have split this into 2 entries because Anthronomicon and Helionomicon were 2 very different records overall with different focus and style. Now, they still both sounded like Othar, and they weren't necessarily a double LP, but really everyone experienced them that way. And I don't think there were many people who bought one and didn't buy the other. And so, really, it did end up being a double album, and one where I preferred Anthronomicon over Helionomicon. And that doesn't really matter because they're both great. If you're a fan of black death metal and the weirding way that Ulthar approaches technical death metal in a very classic way, which is avant-garde but also riff-driven, there's really not much else like it out there, and few that really call back in a way where you're really happy to pick up these records anytime they show up. I think that there's so much to say about both of these records that I already kind of did in long reviews and video reviews, that I guess the thing to say is that it everything up in the like this register of the list is of the highest quality. You know, there's only so many things that you can pack into a 75 item list when you really think about it, and you've experienced so much. So for me, explaining why I put these 2 records together is more important than it's the fact that they kind of occupy the line drawn in what is well above average. And that's kind of where this starts on this list. Is this record is the marker for where things get very good and are like world class. Although not to say anything bad about the previous, 10 or 20, but this is what was more where my fixation went for most of the year in terms of listening habits, outside of reviewing. So also, there's something to be said for this being some of the best album art of the year. I think anytime that Ulthar puts out a record, we expect something this great from this artist, and it's just this was incredible. I bought both of the records because of it, just because I wanted to have the big version of that art. So, really fantastic overall. Now, I know that when Demoniac's last record hit, it was a surprise. It was just a huge record. It was avant-garde a little bit. It was a very thoughtful and brilliant thrash metal record that felt like more sophisticated than anything I would have expected. Even though Demoniac's first album was about just as good, it was just a little bit more typical in its art direction and the songwriting. So the second record from this band felt like an absolute classic. So I expected as much from Nube Negra. And I put it at number 23 because it really did live up to those standards. But it was entirely a different record. This is a lot of those interesting ideas that they brought to their past two records are still here in full. This is just more of a aggressive, hateful, and arrogant record that is both full of showmanship and aggression and destructive attitudes. That is like, it's very impressive that they took this turn and just kind of gave their wrath back to the world. So I liked that about it quite a bit. It is one of the more interesting thrash metal bands to form in the last several years, and shows that Chile just kind of has this endless well of these incredible bands, and I'm glad a lot of them are sticking around. So Untergang is the final record from Earthhouse. And, well, I mean, most people know who these Netherlands-based folks are. They're sort of a black doom metal duo who are known for their atmospheric black metal style and their unique vocals and their treatment of doom in their own way over the last several years. Their works have become bigger productions. They've sold gin. They've done a lot. And I placed this one at number 22 because I felt like this is actually one of the better records from the band because it combines a lot of what they've been doing in their last three records in a very succinct way. And it does it with a sort of a miserable attitude, and there's just a certain feeling to this record that was very effective, and it felt like a fitting goodbye to a band who have now, they've disbanded, pretty much from the moment this released. So a good send-off, a great record, and one that really stuck in mind. At number 22, we have Titus Eye of Water. This is a San Diego, California-based death doom metal band who incorporate heavy elements of shoegaze and depressive rock into their sound. This makes for very long and involved pieces, which are entirely their own thing. I think that their first full-length record had gotten it right, but they hadn't quite hooked me in. And this record was very much like I just felt like I got lost in this record every time I listened to it, and it reminded me of like old Catatonia records and Disembowelment and things where there was such a fixation that it felt transcendent. It felt like something beyond the norm. It felt like something new, and I think other bands have tried to do things like this, but there's something bold about the way that Tideless do it that had me coming back to it, and yeah, this was just one of the more involved and interesting things that I ran into this year that I think not enough people really talked about. At number 20, we have Terminalists, The Crisis as Condition. This Danish-American thrash metal band they kind of had already nailed it on the last record. That was a good record. It was melodic, it was technical, it was very intelligent in its themes, and it's very strong in its art direction. And I feel like they've both iterated on those qualities while improving in terms of their production values. They've packed more riffs into this thing. They've made it a little bit meaner, and they've focused on developing even a different theme that is kind of surprisingly downtrodden in a way, and sort of facing destruction right in the eyes. And I think that it makes for a very timely, meaningful thrash metal record, and at a time where a lot of people are just kind of stupid and devolved in their viewpoint on the world, unable to take in all of the data and the information that comes throwing at you every day. And this feels like these guys have an extra processor. They've got an extra, molecule in their brain that has it right. And I think that they've made a meaningful record out of it, and one that is great thrash too. And I think that's a good place to be, where this is their own thing, and they've sort of made their own space, which is hard to do with thrash and still get anyone's notice these days. Number 19 is Afterburst In But Not Of. And I know a lot of people expect this to be much higher on the list, I think because it was so hyped and a lot of people were so excited about it. I was thrilled about it. I think it was a great record. It's probably one of their most original releases to date, and the last one was already way up there. It was one of my favorite records when it came out. And I think that I have no less enthusiasm for this record. It's just that there's really no downside to broader exploration, and this is much more of a progressive death metal record that still retains those brutal and slamming, the side of it, but also moves in a lot of different directions that were maybe more rock oriented or hardcore or this or that or the other. There's a lot going into this record. It had to be a focused listen every time I picked it up after a while. And so it's kind of like watching a film where it can't be ambient. It can't be atmospheric. You've got to really focus on the dialogue every time. And, maybe that moves it down a couple rungs on the list in terms of listening experience. But again, this is one of the most original, metal records of the year, I would say, overall, and one that has its entirely its own personality. Vast Reaches Unclaimed is a debut full-length album from Minneapolis, Minnesota-based melodic black death metal trio Majesties. And I said it at number 18 because it was so absolutely consistent with its emotionally driven affect and its very strong performances throughout most of its first half and part of its second half. I think there's a couple of songs that don't necessarily work, or they become a little bit redundant when we look at the full listen overall, but that doesn't mean that any of it isn't any less effective or whatnot than the other. It's just that this wasn't a perfect record, but it certainly did everything right. And what I mean is that the curation of this thing was perfect. The album art and the songwriting is quite sharp throughout, and obviously these folks are known for bands that are equally great, and so this is just a starting point. I would imagine they've got an even better record in them coming up at some point, but more my point is that yes, this was fantastic, and it did have its emotional value to it. I think that melodic death metal always has had, but in very intermittent sparks. But that didn't necessarily mean it was yet one for the ages so much as just a fantastic record that was very notable this year. So I'm kind of, I'm not trying to talk you off a ledge if this is your favorite record this month, but this is why I put it down at 18 rather than number 8. So I think that I'm not tentative on my appreciation of this record. It's more, I think they have more in them. I think they've got more records ready to, in mind, where it would be maybe a little bit better rounded as a full listening experience. Now, I've been a Hex Vessel fan for a long time, and it was interesting to hear that this latest full-length Polar Veil was actually kind of a black metal record, or at least inspired by a certain era of it. And this is fairly bold for a 6th full-length album because it not only collects what these folks are already quite good at, what they've done in the past, but it does something new with it. And this sounded like nothing else in the atmospheric black metal realm this year. And in their own realm, the own world that Hex Vessel exists out in the forests of Finland, this still feels like something poetic. It feels like it's experiential and charming in its songwriting, where I even like this more than the Grave Pleasures record they put out because it was just that much more captivating. So Very strong record, and one that I didn't see enough people talking about. At number 16, we have Fabricant's Drudge to the Thicket. And I don't think anyone was expecting to get a album from Fabricant. They put out several demo tapes and things back in the day, but it was kind of in a style of maybe like a Demolic or something like that, around the time that bands like Blood Incantation and all of them were kind of getting an inkling as to what they were moving towards on their early releases. And it felt like the technical death metal trio involved had moved on, where at least two of the members, or two of these folks now, had they produced a couple full lengths as Mephitis, however you pronounce that, and those are up to a very high technical standard. They're also a little bit black metal in some of their construction. They call it dark metal themselves. And this band is much more squarely in the traditional or early forms of technical death metal, and they've really just brought back what they were working on and worked it up to a modern standard of their other groups. And the result is pretty amazing. I think that it is maze-like and captivating in every second that it appears. It is both classicist and avant-garde, and it reads as modern no matter what. It's just a fantastic and mind-boggling record that was surprising in every way as it revealed itself.